Okay, let's have a look at what I basically, the questions are usually about what I've bolded and then I've put red in after. So, okay, I guess this is my first question. So you've said I need to distinguish between when I'm asking a question about how a particular philosopher would think about something and when I'm trying to develop my own theory or spitball ideas, as I think you've called it. But how do you know? Because I
How do you
won't
know
always
which
know
one
if,
you're
how do I, yeah, because I don't know if someone else has it. I don't know if the philosopher has an answer
okay?
to it. You know what I'm saying? Like, what if
Yeah.
you don't know if there's an answer to that?
Well, I meant more like if you knew you were asking specifically, like you were specifically asking in your head, like what did he think about induction? Say that was your question or something he thought.
Right.
I mean, that might necessarily, that's just a different way of approaching it
Mm-hmm.
because you're trying to find an existing theory, which would be the same with science. Like if I wanted to ask about what was Copernicus's idea of how the Earth or how the Earth orbited the sun versus say astronomers now, things like
Okay.
that. I mean, like there's differences in time and context there. So it's just a matter
Okay.
of knowing, are you trying to develop something new or see something old? So, I mean, if you're
Okay.
trying to develop a theory about, say, free will that's deeper than Rand, then that's you coming up with more ideas on top of something old.
I got it. Okay. So the distinction is, am I trying to develop something or am I trying to answer a question that I think has already been asked and answered?
Yes, correct.
Got it.
Which applies to philosophy or any field, anything you're asking about, science, history, whatever.
Okay.
And same with this one way of thinking about whatever field, like history, art, philosophy, whatever it is.
Okay. Got it. So in this case, when this applies, what I've bolded here, it's applicable when I think someone else has an answer and I don't have that answer, or I can't understand that answer. And then I'm trying to identify what's different about my thinking versus their thinking.
Yes. Like you're what you said about coming to terms one time. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. How do you
Got
get on
it.
the same level of thinking
Got
so you
it.
understand what they're saying?
Okay. What did you mean by state your question in terms of which terms and ideas you want greater clarity on?
Like state the concepts you feel uncomfortable about, like principles, like you
Right.
kind of did that already. So, and even what about principles, like moral principles and violating them? So, I mean, I think you did that. So, I don't think
Okay.
that's
Both of these steps should have a corresponding example, a clear example, and an example that makes you feel uncertain but not completely lost. Do you mean, so one is identify what spurred my thinking originally and then give an example of that?
no. I just mean that what spurred your thinking is just a separate thing. An
Oh, okay.
example would just be the example of the concept in question. I mean, just
Okay.
wait, what's clear versus
But
unclear?
what did you mean? Which both steps are you referring to then?
Oh, the facts you understand clearly. The State your question in terms of what you want greater clarity. I probably could have worded that better. So I'm saying the thing you understand clearly and the thing you don't understand very clearly. So I'm saying
Okay.
what you want greater clarity on.
Got it. You're
And
talking about the examples.
yes, I could have wrote it better.
And when you say what principles make it clear, what are you referring to?
Oh, that's just an example. Like these are example questions that you might ask to say why it makes sense. I mean, you might say, oh, I get this principle of like, if you understood the moral principle of honesty, you could say that I understand what integrity is or something. Or like, if you understood clearly about concept formation, you would probably understand clearly, say, measurement omission. It would be clear
Okay.
to you things
Okay.
that
So when in giving examples, I'm trying to then relate the principles I do know to those examples. Is that right?
Yeah, or make it clear to another person, make it clear to yourself what specifically you're talking about
All
in
right.
relation to the language you use to talk about it. Like there's always a reason it makes sense. Like I get it because like it explains what I already know. Like, well, what do you already know? Or what about it is logical to you? Which is kind of what you did when you restated what you did understand. It's just a further example of that. I think where you said you understand that moral principles do X, Y, Z, that much you did understand. So that's
Yeah.
an example of that. But this is just going more in depth once you placed out the question.
Okay, cool. So stop with one contradiction and go with that.
I think that's sufficient.
Would you?
It depends how deep the question is, but usually I think if you find a contradiction, that's usually what the problem is. That's usually the first one, I would think.
In my case, there are actually, I realized in writing it, I think it's, no, this is the wrong file. I was just going to show you. I'll rewrite. Here it is. Yeah. So in this case, I realized there are multiple. It's difficult because there are multiple intertwined contradictions or difficulties. So, for example, one is a question on principles themselves, like the principles in practice and what you gain from them. Another one is the appeal of, let's say, evil in some situations.
Yeah.
Right. And they're two different things, but they're intertwined.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulties, because there's usually a lot of related questions that come up. Like, for example, just on this one question I had alone, right? There were actually, I'll just see if I can tell you what else was in there. I kept it separate, but there were questions on, let's see if I can find it. Okay, there were questions on habit and the mechanism in which the mechanism by which you establish certain patterns of behavior into yourself. That's a whole separate thread. There's questions on violating principles just once. There's questions on evasion, and they're all intertwined, but I can't put them all in the one thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer this on its own. It will be just one step in the right direction,
Yeah.
but not an answer.
Yeah. The way I got in practice with this is just taking grad school classes. And if you ask a question, you only have so long to phrase it and so long to put it all out there, enough information to ask it coherently. So it gives you practice with getting to the point without going into all the side questions and that are relevant and interesting, but not critical. If you take any philosophy class, it easily gets into tangents. It can be frustrating, but because questions are so difficult to ask. But once you get to the point, it's just something you just need to do in school. It's something you practice and practice over and over. That's where you get used to it.
So to me, it sounds like what I need to do is improve at identifying different contexts and go, okay, I'm going to assume this and this in this context. And they're all sub problems, which I don't have answers to, but I'm going to assume them. And I'm only going to answer or ask a question about this specific problem. And then later I'm not going to let the thread or the questioning evolve into those other questions. I'm going to keep them separate, and then I'm going to come back to them later. They're all like, so I see it as in maths, they tell you when you want to solve a problem, break it down into a lot of sub problems.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to approach it that way.
Yes. That's smart. And that's overall what I'm trying to do, like break it down into a method of thinking about a question so it could apply to really any field, because these are just questions. How do you ask a question? Which I'm not even evaluating what your answers or anything, just how do you ask the question? Because once you're going to ask it, then you pretty much can get an answer pretty quickly, at least by asking people. You can get relevant information from people.
Okay, so I've summarized your steps. Tell me if you think I got this correct.
We could probably get rid of the word philosopher's way of thinking at the top, since this is not specific to philosophy. Well, it is a philosophical method, but it applies to any field of deliberation or thinking things through. Yeah, expert, that's a good way to put it. Express what's what you're thinking. Yes, I'm getting at that too. State the question, yes. Provide examples. Okay, we want to clarify number 4. And state the question we want. Well, we want a clear and unclear example. That's what I was trying to get at. You want something that stands out in your mind and something that is vague or unclear in your mind. For what exactly is it? So we're asking questions about, state the question about, I think, a specific concept or theory about your problem. State one unclear example. But your problem, or what word did I use? I used a specific word, like not confusion, but your,
Prediction.
yeah.
State the question which identifies the contradiction.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. Yeah, I'm trying to have you find the concept you're unclear about, give a clear example of it, give an unclear example of it, and give an example of how the examples will allow you to figure out what you understand, what you don't understand. Trying to make it into more stepwise thing.
My
Yeah,
aim was just to work out if I got
yeah.
the general gist of what you were saying. That's
Yeah,
why I
think this
summarized it.
is, yeah, let me make sure I get the gist. State the question should be number 2, actually. I think, because that's like, that's what you want clear as day is to start, because that way you know what you're getting at right away. Yes, this looks better. Then you compare the examples also. I mean, it could be explain the examples and compare them. Then that should be, that would give you, yeah, that would be right.
Okay, cool.
Explain and compare, yes. That looks right. That's better.
Should we go on to causes?
Sure.
How do you know that these are good tools of thought? And also, I've got more questions about it, but yeah, I guess that's my first question. How do you know that this is a good tool of thought?
At least when other philosophers talk about trying to reduce questions to simple events, usually any criticism I've heard from Rand or Peacock criticize other philosophers for being too narrow or ignoring too much information. Even philosophers disagree with each other because they think they missed the point or they miss some essential that the other thinks is not essential. Usually it's a matter of dropping context or inability to find context. So you want to encourage yourself to find full context of what you're thinking about. And that's how I think of it, that you're trying to have full explanations rather than partial ones. And how do you make sure you have a full explanation? Well, you have to realize there's multiple levels of abstraction. There's not just, say, atoms and that's it. Or there's not just ideas and that's it. Well, they're both real. We know they're real, which is about explaining them.
I'm writing my questions here.
Yeah.
What did you mean by reduce questions to simple events? I don't, an event of what?
Well, like I was saying yesterday about the atomists or Democritus, that everything is just atoms bumping into each other and that's it. There's no consciousness, just things bump into each other. That's all it really is.
And how did okay, so how did he go wrong? And why does that relate to the four causes?
Well, reductionism is why it goes wrong. It's reducing everything to a simple physical event, which is ignoring the context of, say, the fact that we are self-evidently conscious or just, it's clear that we do think or that existence exists. It's like trying to reduce something to a non-conscious explanation or trying to reduce things to something that deliberately ignores other things. Like don't want to forget what's real in front of you. It's true, yes. There are atoms that move around and hit each other. Things are made of parts and they bump. True, but does that mean everything you observed is then invalid? No, it's just an additional part of reality that you found out or part of the explanation. Because there's more to talk about, of course. Because that it's like, well, why is it do I feel aware? Why is it that I have thoughts? Why do other things operate in some ways unpredictable ways? Like those questions like that, like, well, there's got to be more explanation because things moving, atoms hitting each other is not enough. There's more to explain. Things are left out.
How does okay, but how does that relate to the four causes? Like, could you give me a concrete example of where one of the questions from four causes relates to what you just said? Because I can't see it.
Sure. Well, let me think of an example. Well, the table example. I mean, how do you explain why a table is the way it is? I mean, you talk about its material, you talk about wood. What makes tables act the way they do? Wood is part of it. And whatever wood does, what's made out of, it helps you explain just more about its nature. I mean, you don't want to say a table is just wood. It's more than that. I mean, wood is part of its explanation. As causes, there's supposed to be explanations, as I mentioned. So
I see. Okay. So you want to look at a table as wood, but also as a man-made object on which you can hold things, and also
yes,
as a thing. I don't know what else, but yeah, I get the point. So there's like, if you're looking at a table, you're looking at it from multiple perspectives, as you've said.
yes.
Okay, I see that.
Yes.
And how do we know what fields this is useful for? Like, where did Aristotle apply this? This is just a philosophical
metaphysics mostly.
Okay.
It really stems from metaphysics and the book Physics, which physics meaning why do things change? Why do they move and why do they change? So you say, oh, this is how we analyze that question. How do things change from one thing to another? Or in what ways do they not change from one to another?
And how does that apply to a table? Like when I'm looking at a table, it's not changing, it's just there. So what does it mean to analyze how things change?
Well, what its nature that it has. I mean, one day it might be destroyed, or one day somebody might sit on it, or might be chopped up as firewood.
Okay.
or I mean, eventually it changes form, whether it's rust or rots or chopped up by somebody, or just the fact like it loses a leg. Or you could say, oh, the table lost its leg. Is it still a table? Is there something about the nature of the wood that did that? Why did this table do that? Why is this particular table acting this way rather than that table over there? How do these tables differ?
But this doesn't apply to, for example, in that you can see here, I ask, okay, you give the example of table, but I mean, it doesn't really apply to war, or it doesn't apply to friendship. I don't even, well, what about air or like a tutoring session? Like,
Um,
is it only metaphysics? Because, how do I apply it to, yeah, let's just go with the tutoring session. Like, what is this tutoring session made out of? It doesn't seem like that's a good question to
well,
ask.
could say words. It depends. Yeah, when you would say words or discussion or dialectic or teaching,
Or
you gotta know
electrons,
what the
or,
thing is. It depends
there's
what it depends what you're asking.
okay.
It's the material of it. But first, of course, you gotta know what is it you're talking about. I mean, let's say, is it war or is it water? And if it is war, what would we say? Maybe not literally, but what is a war made out of? You could say it's the countries. Like it's just made of countries fighting, or it's made of armies. You could
Yeah.
say that.
Okay. But then
What
you don't
army?
know, you don't really, there's so many answers to that, isn't there? You could say it's armies, you could say it's atoms, you could say it's guns, you could say it's tanks and people, you could say it's governments, you could say it's um, ideologies. I don't know. Like, how do you know what
But
I'm saying? Like, aren't we trying to stretch it in that? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't apply to that. Maybe it does only apply to metaphysics. But aren't we trying to like overstretch it without it necessarily being useful?
um, would it be overstretching? I think it just depends on if you can. Well, yeah, I mean, of course, you can narrow it down material in different ways. I mean, there's wood, there's electrons, but it's whatever. I don't think it's supposed to just be strictly one level of analysis. You could use it on different levels of abstraction. If your level of abstraction is atoms, sure, we could discuss like what's an atom made out of and what makes an atom do what it does. But if we're talking about war, we don't need to reduce it to that level. We're focusing on war and the level of whatever size that is. You
Okay.
could say war is just, it's made up of armies or fighting or killing, whatever
Yeah.
material you want to be focused on.
So that maybe the behaviors, well, I don't know if behavior is considered a material, but
Yeah,
the
and you
things,
might
human
rephrase the
bodies.
process. Yeah, you might rephrase it, but the idea being you want to analyze the things war is made out of, quote unquote, what it's made out of. As a
Yeah.
historian, you might want to know who is it made out of, what makes it a war, or not what makes it a war, but who consists of the war combatants. Because say they're soldiers. If that's all you want to analyze, then that's it. Does it include
Mhm.
the civilians? Does it just include the countries? That's like the material of war, or bullets or arms or whatever.
Okay.
The efficient cause could be, well, that's who's doing it. So this one might be more like the leaders at home or the general is causing things to happen. He decides where the military goes. He's using the materials to cause it to happen. Like he's using the army to create a war. He's using an army to say take over Germany or something.
Right. Okay. I guess this needs to be applied, but another, so efficient cause, what intangible reality caused something to change or move? Okay. So for example, let's just go with the tutoring session. Like, there's
Yeah.
so many options. Is it that I scheduled this lesson last week, or is it that I started tutoring last year, or is it that I took an interest in philosophy, or is it that I read Ayn Rand, or is it that someone gave me a book on Ayn Rand, or is it that I joined a forum and said I was looking for a tutor, or is it that before I read the book on Ayn Rand I was interested in philosophy, or like, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't, it's
Yeah.
hard to pick What the
But
hell?
what is are you asking the cause of tutoring? Or are you asking the cause of this tutoring session? What explains us having this tutoring session? Is that what you mean?
Okay, let's go with this tutoring session to make it easy. Yeah.
Why are we having this one?
Yeah.
Well, as far as the efficient cause, it's because I called into your Zoom and I started teaching you or started talking to you. I mean, I'm the cause of this tutoring session happening. In the sense that without me, I don't think you wouldn't be tutored at this tutoring session. It's me that's causing you to be tutored, that you're getting something.
Yeah, but
I mean,
without me,
well,
without me, it wouldn't exist either. So it's
yeah,
like, but you see what I mean? Like breaking it down is
in a
not.
sense, we could both be that. It gets into really some complex distinctions Aristotle made, but the basic idea was like we could be like a joint efficient cause, that
Right.
we're both
Okay.
making it happen, that we're the most proximate thing, the most immediate thing. Like I signed on, you signed on, the tutoring session happened. Simple
Okay.
explanation.
And then the formal cause, like let's stick with the tutoring. The formal cause is I didn't quite get this abstract pattern or arrangement, like
Yes.
the design. So in this case, what about all those different causes I gave you, like including, because there's like a whole series of causes. There's not one here.
Right. But you're thinking of efficient causes, I think. I think those are a series of efficient
Efficient
causes.
causes.
Like just you decided X and led to another decision, led to another decision. Those are efficient causes. That
Okay,
would
so
be a
what
chain
about
of
the formal then?
what cause. What causes this tutoring session? What explains this tutoring session? It could be, say, seeking knowledge or gaining knowledge, or a form of what makes it tutoring as opposed to a conversation. What makes this a tutoring session as
Is the
opposed to strictly teaching, say.
is the formal cause the fundamental that drives all the efficient causes? So for example, all those that I listed, I read. Someone gave me a book and I read it. I took interest in it. Before that, I was interested in philosophy. Seeking knowledge is the answer, right? Like that's one answer.
I
That's
would
like a
say so.
fundamental. Okay, so that's a
I think
formal.
Aristotle would say it different. The
Okay.
way you phrase it, I slightly disagree with Aristotle. I think Aristotle would just refer to it as it's the universal, which is different for him. Anyway, it's a universal. That's what
Mm-hmm.
he's referring to, which is abstract, even for him. But be aware that Aristotle means it slightly different. But the general idea that formal cause is that abstract essence, that abstract thing that makes it what it is, that isn't tangible, that isn't there, it exists abstractly.
Okay, got it.
Aristotle
So,
called it the invisible appearance, which would be an abstract essence.
so then that I don't know if that only applies to anything human, right?
Oh,
Because
anything.
what's a formal cause of a rock? Like, there's no.
We could talk about I don't know, say the different theories of rock formation. Like it's a metamorphic rock. So the formal cause would be the way that pressure builds up and compresses it. I mean, in the sense that there's a theory about the
Got it.
rocks.
Okay.
In
So
general, it's not. You might say that the pressure was the efficient cause, but the formal cause is this pattern about the nature of what makes a diamond a diamond, what kind of abstract thing made that happen by nature.
all right, here's how I'm conceptualizing it then. The formal cause is connecting the concrete efficient causes to the generalization that explains them. Just as, for example, Socrates' mortality is explained by the generalization all men are mortal. So it's an effect of that generalization. Then all efficient causes are effects of the formal cause, which is a generalization.
They're distinct things, but Formal cause just being the concept, just the abstract thing.
Right.
Like you
The
hold the concept.
generalization. The
Yes.
generalization which explains all the efficient causes as effects, particular effects of that generalization.
I don't think it's necessarily meant to explain the efficient causes. The efficient causes are just the immediate things, and the formal cause is another way to describe the efficient causes doing what they do. They describe the same thing, but different aspects of the same thing.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
So
how I'm seeing
there's
it so far. I don't see
wait,
it as
there's the
different.
concrete, there's the concretes, and then there's just the generalization, the abstraction of those concretes acting. If that's the
I'll give,
same to you, if that explanation makes sense, then you agree.
I'll give
You
you an
just word
example.
it different.
The
Okay.
rock. You said the rock is the
Yeah.
formal cause of the rock is something about pressure. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And so the pressure is the whatever the pressure, I don't know, whatever the hell the process is, the general process. A particular instance of that process is this rock. And so
Yes.
in a sense, the formal cause is the generalization explaining the efficient cause. But it's different in that it's a different explanation. It's like looking at it differently, but it's the efficient relies on the formal. That's how I'm seeing it, given the examples that we've had so far.
But they rely on each other, I guess we could say. They rely on each other. You can't have an efficient cause without the formal, and the formal doesn't exist without the efficient. All these things must exist together as a unity. So it could go either way. Either direction would be valid.
Is the formal cause of Socrates' death that all men are mortal?
Something like that seems a good idea.
But then Socrates, the formal cause can then exist without Socrates.
Sure, but as so far as Socrates was real, it will always relate to Socrates. Like it will always refer to that. That's what I'm thinking of. They will never not refer to Socrates.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm getting it more than I did before, so that's cool. The final cause is the
This is
end
the easiest one.
that something is moving towards.
Tutoring could be just knowledge, be more probably.
But
easier.
knowledge, presumably knowledge goes to something else. Doesn't this just infinitely go on until you get to some final end? Isn't that the idea?
More or less, yes. But
and then sorry.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. It's where you want to stop it, I guess, or what level of abstraction you want to focus on.
Right. Okay.
You would just say, maybe you could say final cause, understanding objectivism, that could be sufficient. But then what's the final cause of that? Are we just get into like, well, what's the final cause of living? Right? It's all interrelated.
So you have to pick the level of abstraction, because otherwise you're always going to one thing, right? You always just end up at happiness or philosophy.
Essentially, yes.
All right.
Or eating would just be to satisfy your hunger. That could be a final cause. Or why does
well, that sounds more
fall?
like a formal cause, but
they're similar, of course, but this is really to what end it goes to specifically.
Okay. So what in mortality, all men are mortal, what's the final cause of that?
I don't think I'd phrase it that way. Why are they immortal? Are you asking why is man mortal? Would that be the question? The explanation?
I guess so. Isn't that what the final cause asks? So how would one think about that?
What does this particular?
Okay, let's look at let's just go with we're analyzing Socrates' mortality. So the formal cause is Well, if we start on that level, then it becomes, what is it? The material cause is, I don't know.
You could say the material, that would seem like a question about the essence of Socrates. What is Socrates? Why is Socrates? And the big why does he exist?
Or
Why
human
is he what he
mortality.
is?
Human
Yeah, I mean, we
mortality
could
is
say, what explains mortality? Okay, then what's the end of mortality? Or can mortality have an end, a
I
purpose
don't,
of its?
I don't know.
Well, we could say mortality, the final end is why does one change in that way? It would make me wonder if mortality is actually the right question. Like, are we asking why is he mortal? Or do we say why does he die?
Well, I don't know if
Because
it's hard to know if it's the
the
right
hard
question
question.
unless I, unless I had a good grounding of how he got to these
Yes.
questions and perspectives in the
Yeah.
first place. But maybe we
Yeah.
shouldn't, maybe we're
That's a really hard one. I think
get too
that's the more
much.
advanced question.
All right,
That's an advanced
let's
question.
let's skip it. I think I get the general idea and I don't
Yeah.
want to go
Yeah.
too deep with little gains. So
Yeah.
okay, you said in this way, principles are not rules to follow. They help you achieve goals without predefining what the result should look like concretely. I get that, but why does that differentiate them from rules?
Rules to me seem to convey that there needs to be a specific result, that you have a rule in chess
Oh,
to make
okay.
sure the rules always, the game plays out by specific boundaries, that you can't go out that it must look a
Sounds like
certain way.
principles.
Similar, but rule usually conveys that a more specific outcome, I think. Usually
Okay.
just what it connotes to me.
Okay. All right.
Corresponding goal, just the goal that I mentioned from the first paragraph.
The goal. Oh, okay. The goal that you want help to achieve using principles.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah. Further thinking.
For
We'll just,
attaining that specific goal. I'm getting it now. I think so. Further thinking to attain the specific goal.
further thinking, like when you asked about piracy, I mean, that's deeper than just stealing. It's a deeper question. It's
Right.
beyond simply theft, beyond theft is violation of property rights. It's deeper question. Like, what about it is a violation? Well, you need something deeper than merely moral principles, I think, to give a good answer.
Got it. I've answered my question here. The
Yeah.
foundationality to thinking just means that if you have a goal, let's go with the context. Action presupposes knowledge. If you want to act towards a certain goal, you need knowledge. Principles help you attain that knowledge, and you think and attain more knowledge by building on principles to attain that
Yes.
thing. So that's what you're saying. Okay, cool.
Yes.
All right, let me ask you something. When you begin, okay, you gave the example of baking a loaf of bread. Let's go with that. Do you, in a sense, do you begin with principles like it's as if you begin in space and you have to come back down to Earth? This is a bad sort of analogy, but I like it because it sort of captures what I'm getting at. And I said you come back down to Earth using faith-based technology. And what I mean by that is, so you're out in space and someone gives you a principle. They're like, hey, get in this rocket ship. It'll help you get to Earth. And you're like, all right, let me try it. Instead of, building a spaceship yourself, you're like, let me just get in your spaceship and see what happens. See if it's real.
Yeah.
And then you go back down to Earth. And in the same way, if I learn to bake a bread, I don't know about all these methods. Like, I don't know if they work. I don't know if these principles apply, but I'm like, all right, let me just begin and take over this rocket ship that someone else built. I have no idea why or how it works, but I'm just going to get in and see if it works. And that's how you validate the principles. Like specifically in baking bread, another example, just to give more, like, let's say you want to get into business, you want to work for yourself. Like, rather than just try stuff at random, it does make sense to go, all right, well, people who are successfully running companies, how did they start? What principles did they follow? And then follow them, even though it's kind of like, it feels a bit like you don't know why it works this way, or why you should motivate people in this way, or why you should run your organization like this fully. Like, it's not, you in approximately like, oh yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense, but it's not like you've validated it. You have to get in the magical spaceship and test it yourself to validate it. The magical spaceship of God.
In some sense, it would be both, because of course, any field by now in this time in the world, that there's always something that somebody already knows and something you don't know. So that's always going on. You can always start learning something. I'm thinking, if you never had anyone in a field before, if you're Aristotle and no one was a biologist before, well, what do? You can't even look to somebody else. There's nothing there. So you start working with things with your hands and building up the principles and discovering them, then working with those. From there, you got to build them to start with. And Aristotle couldn't ask others, so he just did it himself, and then others trusted him. Maybe they looked towards him about knowing his knowledge. I mean, principles of trust, I guess, you have to learn about too, whether or not you believe Aristotle with things he said. But I think you always have to do both. You need to both, like, you need something to work with and test it out, but at the same time, you need to be working at it on your own as well. It's hard to find the balance. I think it depends on specifically the field. There's not a lot of risk with baking bread. You could just make several loaves of bread and see what happens. But trying on a rocket ship, well, you don't have as many chances to get it right.
I think there's principles. So there's not much in objectivism that covers uncertainty, but there's principles from finance that apply, which is you basically just work to avoid your risk of ruin because you can't account for everything. And so you work within your context of knowledge, but on the principle of always avoiding risk of ruin. So total calamity, that's the idea, which I think is a good strategy.
I think that's usually good. But like a complete calamity for baking bread is just, it's inevitable. You wasted $5 versus the calamity of, well, I know what you mean. Rocket ship blowing up and somebody dying.
Right. Okay. So I think we've covered. Yeah. I mean, to summarize, I think the process of validating a principle and the process of inducing a principle are different, and there's probably a lot we can discuss about both with examples, because I feel like we're floating a little bit here unless we can go into a very specific example of a principle I've taken over from someone.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Good. Let's see. A psychology question for you about defense values, if you have thoughts on them.
Defense. Let's see.
This is from Brandon.
Yep. Defense value. Where does it say that? Looking for where it says defense. Does it say defense?
A man can seek to. I think it said it somewhere else, but anyway, the point is, a pretense. A man can seek to maintain his pretense. Okay, let me just by two basic means.
Evade and repress. Well, evade, yes. Repress.
So one is avoidance, and secondly, okay, this is the second one, is the second aspect of maintaining your pretense and self-esteem is what I'm concerned with. And he can seek to derive his sense of efficacy and worth from something other than rationality. For example, well, that is, he can seek to derive his sense of efficacy and worth from some alternative value or virtue, which he experiences as less demanding or more easily attainable, such as doing one's duty or being stoical or altruistic or financially successful or sexually attractive. Like, first of all, why does that? This is a psychology question. I realize this is no longer in the realm of philosophy, but why is it that one can attempt to derive a sense of efficacy and worth from some alternative irrational value? And then how would you know like that one, given this definition?
And seek to derive it.
Because then in a sense, everyone who has a value not based on an explicit principle, and then you could say it's a defense value.
Well, I'm thinking at first as there's the standard of value and then your method of attaining that value. For one, that could be, well, so we're talking about standards other than life and methods other than rationality. So maybe my state life is your standard, but you reject rationality as the method. So I mean, either way, if you don't use rationality, you're going to be using something else to base your decision on. That fundamental value is not rationality anymore, or that not the fundamental method is not rationality anymore. It's, let's just say it's something else. Let's say it's hedonism, say pure pleasure. Let's say it was that. I mean, the value in your life, or the even the meaning, the purpose of your life would always revolve around pleasure. I mean, that was the base everything off of that. Pleasure is the basis of whether you succeed, whether you fail, whether you're doing well, whether you're worth anything to yourself, whether you're not worth anything to yourself. I think the idea here is that if you aren't using rationality, it's untenable, it's weak, it's frail, it's easy to break, and your self-esteem is therefore weak, or you might not have any, because it's not really about yourself, because you reject rationality. Everything but yourself is involved there. At least that would be the argument. You would say that pleasure is not selfish. Pleasure in and of itself purely is not something that makes you feel like life is worth living. It's more than that. It's not just that. It's got to be deeper. It's got to be bigger.
So do you think it's, okay, so I got a few questions for you. Do you think the essence of it then is the attainment of pleasure, like physical pleasure? Because, you know, he wrote here,
One
stoical
example.
being, yeah, okay, because he did write being stoical or altruistic,
Yes.
which to me is not, that does not seem pleasure.
No, it's not. So, or whatever it might be, it could be that denying your rational or your emotional life is the proper standard, that where you believe that's what rationality is. Well, it won't bring you to, because it's not a rational motivation, because it's not about rationality in the objectivist sense. It couldn't bring that self-esteem because it's not a true sense of self. You aren't living by the nature of man. You have to reject, say, emotion, which is part of man's nature, which is part of your nature of your functioning, what makes your life what it is. To have those things, denying them prevents self-esteem.
What, let me just think about this. First of all, so I've got one other question. You said it's not about yourself because you reject rationality. I didn't follow that. What did you mean? Sorry, I don't remember the full context. I stuck onto that.
That ultimately, without rationality, we can't apply things to our lives. Like that's our means to do it. There are no other means. And that's the objectivist.
Apply things to our lives?
The only way to attain things that improve our flourishing, to improve our lives, our functioning is through reason and rationality. Without that, we won't succeed. And what Brandon's further explanation is that people then choose these things because it's easy. It's easier, it takes less effort. It doesn't take as much focus to just go along with than rationality. it's easier to seek pleasure than it is to be rational. That's easier to be just simply stoic than be rational.
Okay. So, okay, I guess we could reword what he's saying then. So he's claiming that you can either try and maintain a pretense of it or attain it really incorrectly. Maybe that's another way to look at it.
I would say so. That you
But
could even
attain,
try to derive your efficacy elsewhere, but then it's like a worthless thing that breaks down or makes you neurotic or some other maladaptation that doesn't function well for your happiness or your flourishing. It's like
yeah,
stunted, I guess you could say.
yeah, okay. Although it's hard because he gave the example here of being financially successful,
Yes.
successful or sexually attractive, but they're both rational pursuits, right? Like, so what, how does that,
If we,
what point would, if I'm like, let's say I want to be financially successful or I want to work in a field that I like it's a rational pursuit. At what point would you say it's a defense of what he's claiming is a seeking to maintain either a pretense of self-esteem or
well, I would do it in the usual sense of mental disorders or psychological issues that it negatively functions your life or negatively impacts the functioning of your life.
right?
But yeah, you can make mistakes sometimes and you can make it through and it'll be okay. It's not like you're going to completely drop into a worthless feeling of worthlessness and no self-esteem. It takes time. So that's why we really want to look at it.
Well,
Are you unable to function yet? Is it fixable yet? Are you thinking it through anyway?
okay. Yeah, I agree that you wouldn't collapse. Like there's just like in that post I made the question I asked about the person who's addicted to heroin and robbing banks and then ends up living a great life after
Yeah.
he makes amends. Like, yeah. But okay. So
I
I
mean,
guess
we
we
could
could
analyze it. Like if somebody is having a non-functional life or even say Keating is, you could tell from how Rand talks about him, it explains to you that you can see that he's gone beyond just maybe having some bad habits into something like he's just a neurotic individual that becomes more fundamental. It's more looking at it, is it fundamental to who you are? Or is it just a bad habit that you need to fix? Say, it takes some time to get to know self-esteem. It can take a long time. So, but once you get there, I think his explanation can work.